Ahoy middies, it is Peter Teach here, and in this video we're going to discuss interval types and music theory. In this video we'll go over major, minor, perfect, augmented, and diminished intervals. So let's get started. The first thing to understand when going through intervals is how to count them, or how to determine the size. And we call these, in a way, our generic intervals. Generic intervals. Alright, let me go ahead and draw a treble clef here, and we'll go ahead and draw a middle C. So our generic intervals are just when we're focusing on the size of the interval. So for example, from C to D, I'm going to begin counting by my C being 1. So when you count your intervals, you always want to start with the notes you're beginning with, and then count the next note as your next number. So this would be 2. So we call that a generic second, or just a second. Say we were going from F to C. Then we'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that would be a generic fifth. Alright, moving on from that. So the way I'm going to break down the major, minor, perfect, augmented, diminished is we're going to start with a major interval, and we're going to talk about how to get the other ones from that interval. Perfect intervals are going to be a little bit of an exception, but we will get there. Alrighty, so let's start with major here. We'll go back to our treble clef. And let's just go with C, just to be nice and clean here. So I'm starting with a major interval. Any interval within our major scale except the 4th, 5th, and the octave or the 8th are going to be major. So for example, from my C to D, I'm going to call this, if I go back to my generic intervals, my size is going to be a second. And then, since I'm in a major key, going from C to D, it would be a major interval. The other way I can think about it, if I were looking at a keyboard, let's go ahead and pull up a GarageBand keyboard here. If I'm going from C, turn the volume a little bit, to D, I'm going to go up 1, 2 semitones or half steps. So I start on C and then I go 1, 2. So I go up 2 semitones or 2 half steps, which is going to bring me to that major interval. Alright, let's go back to our file here. Okay, so now let's talk about, well, let's do another one. Let's go from C to E. So from C to E, that would be a major third, because I'm thinking either in my major key, in the major key of C, going from C to E, that is going to be my major third. Or if we go back to our keyboard, we can think about, okay, now we're going to go up 4 semitones. So I'm going from C, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we get this. Do, to, mi, or 4 semitones, however you want to think about it. Alright, so we're going to take this major third now, and we're going to kind of mess around with it a little bit and turn it into every other interval. So let's begin. So here's our normal major third. Just going from C to E. So this is our first. Oh, I want to go back to a pencil. This is our first, and then really that D would be the second in between, and then here we have our third. So let's go ahead and do C to E again, and now we're going to make this interval minor. So in order to make an interval minor, or to make the quality is the word that you'll see most of the time. In order to make the quality minor, you're going to bring this note down a half step, or we're going to bring it down a semitone. So in this case, since we have a natural note, we're going to flat it. So now from my C to my E flat, that would be a minor third. And whenever we are writing out a minor interval, kind of in shorthand like this, we want to make sure we use a lowercase m and then put a little line over top. And then if you see back here when we're doing a major one, we use an uppercase M, and you just leave it as it is. All right, so all I did here is I just brought this interval, or not the interval, I just brought the note down a half step. So I went from C to E flat instead of C to E. So if we go to our keyboard, here's our major third, and then our minor. So we have kind of that different flavor, that different sound there. All right, so let's go over how to get our, let's go to diminished first since we're kind of going in the same direction here. So this is our major, this is our minor, and then we're going to go to diminished. So let's go ahead and write our C out again, and then go up to E. So in order to make an interval diminished, you can think about, okay, now I'm going to bring it down even more. So I went from major, I made it minor by bringing it down a half step. Now I want to make it even lower, even flatter, or however you want to think about that translation, and bring it down 2 half steps, or in other words, a whole step. So starting from this major key here, we go to the minor, so that's down 1/2, or down a half step, if I could spell. And then to get to here, we're going to go down a half step again. So we're going to end up getting, so if we start with our, so we have our E natural here, okay, starting with our major. Then we go to minor, which would be 1 flat. And then we're going to make it diminished, so it's going to add another flat. So we'd actually have an E double flat, which you may be thinking, well, that's just the same thing as a D. Because if we're thinking about our keyboard here, I go from my E to the E flat and then to D. But you could think, okay, that's a major second. But let's talk about why it's not a major second. So we have to go back to our size of the interval. So we're still counting from C to D to E, so that is still a third. So that's the reason it's not going to be a major second instead of, because then we'd actually have to have the note D written in there. So that's how we get our diminished third, or that's the way we write that, giving the spelling of the note names. So, and then you'll just put a lowercase d in front like that to make it a diminished third. All right, let's move the other direction now. So we're going to go back from our major interval here, and we're going to go to augmented. And take a look at what that is going to look like. So with our augmented intervals, we're going to build up from our major interval now. So if we have from C to E, we'll go ahead and write that out again. So that's my major interval here that's written. But now I'm going to raise it up a half step. So I'd end up with E sharp. And that would give me my augmented interval. So going up a half step. And you may be thinking again like, okay, well, C to E sharp is just the same thing as F. Why do I write it like that? Well, it all comes back to the spelling of the notes. Because we have written C to E. So that's 1, 2, and it's still a third instead of being, in theory, it would be the same thing as a perfect fourth, which we're going to get to our perfect intervals in a second here. So it's really important to think about, okay, it's all about the spelling. Don't always necessarily, it's good to count intervals and semitones to an extent, but you want to make sure you're thinking about that size first and what your spelling is. All right, let's go on to our perfect intervals now here at the bottom with the space we have left. Perfect. All right, so within our scale, the fourth, the fifth, and the octave or the eighth are always going to be perfect. And the reason being is because no matter whether or not they're in a major scale or a major key signature or within a minor key signature, they're always going to have the same relation to our tonic or do. And it doesn't change from a major or a minor, kind of depending on the scale type, or there's not even really the ability to really fluctuate between that. So we call those our perfect intervals. So if we're starting from C here, so if we go C to F, that's going to be our perfect fourth, and then from C to So, or Do to So, that's going to be our perfect fifth. And then of course we have that's going to be our perfect eighth or our perfect octave. Alright. Oops. Let's scroll back down here. Erase this mess I created. So when working with our perfect intervals, for example, if we have C to F, that's going to be our perfect fourth. If we want to turn that into either an augmented, oh, by the way, for augmented, you're going to use a capital A, and that would be our augmented third for that. For our perfect intervals, we kind of skip the step of having to go to either through the minor or through the major, which I guess is similar to major, you just go straight up to augmented. But for our perfect intervals, if we go up a half step, it's going to become augmented. And then if we go down a half step, it will become diminished. So if I were to work with this, if I were to turn this into a F sharp, that would become my augmented fourth. And then vice versa, if I were to turn it into an F flat, which is the same thing as an E, that would become my diminished fourth there instead. Alright, so hopefully this tutorial was helpful to an extent. There's kind of a lot of things with intervals that can be a little tricky or confusing. If you have questions, feel free to email me or leave me a comment. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Have a wonderful day.